Alright folks, let me go ahead and turn on my camera here. Alright, the last thing on the docket for today is talking about some external programs like Kixel and Substance Designer workflows. I'm having problems with my Kixel suite right now, but for those of you guys who have been paying attention in the past few weeks, we do have access to elements called megascans. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we have access to every element that we need. When we are grabbing elements from megascans, for example, I hope I'm logged in right now, by going to create and place actors, not create, place actor panel, content, and using Kixel Bridge. For those of you who are using UE4, you actually have to download the Kixel Bridge. If you're using UE5, it's built in by default. Let's see if I'm logged in. You do have access. Bring this up. Open surfaces. To a slew of textures. Now, many of you guys will be curious as to whether or not some of these textures will work. I don't think I have time to cover it today, but for the office hour, I will do a demo for how you can make some of these textures work, especially in your scenes. But that has to do with limitations of how the height map is used and how displacement works in UE5. UE4 people, you don't have to worry about that because displacement still works for you. But for UE5 folks, that awesome displacement that you're seeing here, for example, let me go ahead and grab like something cool looking, like this coal ash looks super cool. I'm going to go ahead and grab that. Oh, it's asking me to sign in. Come on. Give me a moment. There we go. So let me go ahead and download this. Is there any other cooler ones? That one's pretty cool. Let me download that. I'll just give it a sec. I'll be back. Okay, that's downloaded. Let's go ahead and add it. Clicking add. There we go. Successfully exported. Let's make sure it's exported to the correct project. There it is. Save all. Let's go ahead and open that up. It might take a sec for it to load in. As you can see, the files are still kind of working, which is what you deal with when you're using megascans. It might take a sec. And I also have Substance Designer open at the same time, and I have a bunch of stuff open. Let me go ahead and kill some things to see if I can get some performance back before my engine murders me. There we go. There's no way to displace that. That doesn't look nearly as cool, does it? Like, that doesn't look nearly as cool as it looks in the renderer, right? It just doesn't. Oh, I'll talk about that in a second. So, the solution for that is actually kind of complicated, because it doesn't work the way that you think it works. See, I can drag this on here, and that looks okay. I mean, that looks okay from the perspective that we're going to look at it on, but if we apply it to a sphere, we see that that doesn't look very good, and that doesn't really work for us. So, assuming I run out of time today, I'll cover it a little bit more on Wednesday, and there's going to be some things that you can set up. The nice thing, I'll cover it on Thursday. But as you can see, they do give us our textures here. I'll open all of these. Oh, let's go ahead and go here. Let's go ahead and close the glass. I don't need that anymore. Save changes? Yes, please. So we have our image, which is a regular image. It looks like it's... let's go ahead and bump that open and look at the naming convention here. Sometimes the control tab works and sometimes it doesn't. There it goes. So we've got our 4K diffuse, we've got our 4K normal, and we have a 4K ORDP. So that's should be occlusion that should be roughness, and that should be displacement. Part of the difficulty is in the engine doesn't actually use displacement anymore. And while that looks pretty good on the ground, if we look at our wireframe, we see that it's not actually doing anything fancy. It's not actually giving us any kind of displacement. Even if we use a tessellated plane, which I do have in this particular thing. Let's bring our tessellated plane in. Bring it in. Select that. Find that. Drag it on. We see that we're not getting any kind of fancy displacement. We're just supposed to kind of take this as it is now. Well, there's some workarounds for this in UE5, and I'll talk about them in another video. And I'll probably talk about them a little bit more during the office hour, because there is a workaround. Mostly now because they want you to either use nanite, or they want you to actually author the objects that you're creating from. So this kind of leads us into this issue that we're going to be having with the discussion on Substance Designer. Substance Designer is still bar none the de facto standard for making textures in a lot of programs. Epic has invested very strongly in Kixel, but Kixel is not ready for prime time when it comes to generating surfaces like Substance Designer does. Here's the kicker. Substance Designer relies on and heavily uses displacement maps in order to create geometry. The question there is, how does one create the appropriate geometry, and then how does one correctly use a displacement map for the geometry in the engine? How are people getting these amazing looking meshes in UE5? Well, a lot of the videos that you guys see on YouTube are probably from UE4, where you could just crank up the displacement. Now, what people are doing is they're either exporting geometry from another engine, like Blender, and pardon me while I sneeze here real quick, give me a second. And part of it is also using elements like nanite and displacing those elements before bringing them into the engine. So creating geometry, bringing that geometry in as a nanite mesh, and then applying the texture to it so you don't need to use the displacement. Remember that sad face I did last week on the height map / displacement map? That's kind of what I mean. Sorry about that, folks. I had to cut. I was going to sneeze like crazy. Okay, so what does that mean? So if we can't use displacement in UE5, what does that mean for programs that rely on displacement maps in order to create actual displacement? Well, what Unreal recommends is that you actually use the displacement in another program like Blender or Maya or Max to create the geometry that you need. But right now that kind of breaks the functionality with the landscape tool. The landscape tool used to be how we would use, how would we create vast, large scenes but be able to actively displace the ground so that we would get really, really good detail very close up, but very, very bad detail from far away, but it wouldn't matter because we would be so far away we wouldn't see the detail. And unfortunately, I can't really demonstrate that because UE5 doesn't actually do adaptive tessellation anymore. Alright. I think I just cut out some video here. Hold on. For an accident. It's going to look like this. Sorry, there was a weird cut there. I didn't want to have my license numbers available for you guys to be able, because it matters. You're only allowed one seat. This is what it's going to look like. And then over on the right, you can see where you can download it for Windows, Linux or OS X. Some of you guys are using OS 10. But that allows you to download Substance Alchemist, Substance Designer, and Substance Painter. Substance Alchemist is a mixing program that enhances Substance Designer. I'll talk about it in the future, but because this is not a designer class, what it's really used for is to kind of take two materials and mix them together so you can get more variations. Kixel's mixer is more or less the same thing. You can create materials and then mix them together to create custom materials. You can download, say, the coal, and you can download snow and mix them together, and then you can get coal with snow on it. That's kind of how that works. Substance Designer and Substance Painter are still considered the de facto standards for Substance Designer is used to make procedural textures, and Substance Painter is used to create paint on characters. Kixel Mixer can somewhat, but it's not necessarily ready for prime time, if you get what I'm saying. It is not really ready to compete with what Allegorithmic has made with Substance. And a lot of places are still hiring people who still use Substance, although after the acquisition by Adobe, I don't know what's going to happen with that. Most people don't like the acquisition with Adobe. It is what it is. So let me go ahead and hop back to Substance Designer, which looks like this. And I'm going to load some things up so we can talk about what that, and I'll make something relatively quickly. So give me a moment. So one of the benefits, as you can see, I've already set this up to kind of get started with some work here. But one of the benefits of Substance Designer is that you can very quickly start iterating on materials. Now this is not going to be a full demo for Substance Designer. It gets a lot more complicated than this when it comes to just kind of making things. But I'll kind of fly through it so you guys get an opportunity to see kind of how this works. So what this is it's a procedurally generating program that allows you to make materials right out of the box without having to author them. There was a question in the Discord earlier this week that asked, hey, what if I want to make a texture of my own? Are people still making them by generating the mesh in ZBrush or something? Are people still doing it that way? It seems like the emphasis now is going back to that, mostly because Epic wants you to use Nanite. I don't know if that's going to become the de facto standard if they reinstitute displacement maps, but for the time being, let's just assume that they will not bring back displacement maps. Generally speaking, what you would do is you would start with a material in ZBrush, and you would then bring that object and its elements via the baking system inside of ZBrush. Or you would then use transfer maps, as they're called in Maya. I don't know what they're called in Blender. They might still be called the same. To get those textures, you'd be using poly paint and whatnot. You'd be getting those textures off of those elements and then bringing them in as 2D textures. But because programs like Substance Designer and Kixel Mixer exist, making materials is now much, much easier than having to sculpt the data for yourself. Now, there is also the ability to use data that's been scanned. I'm not going to get into the weeds about whether or not that data works overall, but I think it's still important to kind of discuss and kind of figure out. Mostly because scan data is typically what mega scans are supposed to be. They went out with a camera that can detect height, and they scanned those surfaces and then corrected them at their studio and then released them to the public. This is more about generating materials and objects that can be used in an engine, but needs more work now that the Unreal Engine no longer uses displacement out of the box. Let me go ahead and do some stuff here. So, what do I want to do here? I'm just going to make some stuff. I'm going to grab a shape here, and I'm going to change the size of my canvas here to 2048 by 2048. And I'm just going to go ahead and just kind of mess around with this until I get something that works good. We'll get a paraboloid. Sorry. I'm going to change the scale. I think that'll be fine. Leave that value the same, not turn it. That'll be fine. We'll do a quantized grayscale, and I'm not going to do one render seed. We'll just go ahead and put a value in there. I think that'll be fine. Bring this over. We need a lot of room here. So what I'm doing is I'm applying maps procedurally that allow me to control how these shapes are being generated. Add a little bit of randomness here. And I can see kind of what's happening down here as I make this. So I'm going to press F in each window to kind of frame these. Nothing's going to show up here for now. I'm just kind of working in the 2D here. So what I'm doing is I'm using this data to generate some elements. No rotation. Let's get some variation in there. It's starting to look like something. Trying to generate something that looks okay here. So I'm just kind of going through. So what I'm doing here is I'm adding some amount of randomness in this particular tile, and what these tiles do is essentially modify data along the way. So I start with a sphere. I've made a grayscale, a quantized grayscale, which basically separates these values based on sort I'm looking for. Instead of letting them smoothly step, they step gated or by values. So instead of falling into a softness, each of these are gated, clamped, so to speak. And then as that clamp begins to disintegrate, it starts to create this particular shape. And now I'm just trying to create something that looks okay. Come on, give me that result. Thank you. And then I'm going to kind of go from there. So we've got our pattern width, we've got pattern size, we've got no rotation. I added some rotation variation, some zoom, some gain. I'm not going to pan anything. We've got some disorder. Let's get some random disorder in there. There we go. And let's increase the size variation. It's fine. Add some more variation. Okay, that looks okay. I think that'll be fine. So what I'm doing is I've taken this shape as its source output, and this is our final result here. So I'm still going to be adding some stuff to it here. Let's add some noise. Add some noise. And then we'll do this through a warp. We'll do that. There we go. Okay, so we've tightened up some of that. Let's figure out this noise here. Let's increase the scale, or let's increase the size by decreasing the scale. We'll leave the disorder at 0. That's fine. It looks okay. Let's set this to 5, and then I'm just going to bring it down a little bit to see what that looks like. That's fine. So I'm basically just creating some random lines that look cool. I'm going to grab some more noise here. Let's grab clouds 2. I think that'll be fine. No random seed. I think this will be okay. Okay. So it's kind of difficult to explain kind of what I'm doing because this is kind of a little bit more advanced than most people would start. So we'll do this. That'll be fine. We'll go through a blur. We'll lighten some of that blur. Let's see what I want to do here. Kind of eyeballing the result here. That looks pretty okay. Alright, that's my reminder letting me know that I have about a half an hour left here. So let's go ahead and let's keep working here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically convert this shape more and more by applying more filters to it. Again, this is all procedural generation, which makes this very, very editable, very easy to work with. Let's go ahead and increase the samples and see what I can do with that here. This program is not the most friendly to learn. Artists, if you want to become an environment texture artist, you will have to learn how to do this. Let's do a directional warp. Let's bring this in. I'm just going to crank this. That's fine. So I'm adding some more variability. So we've gone from this shape to this shape to this shape using that same math. We've made this shape. We added some noise and some clouds. We've blurred that up to make this shape. So we've gone from here to here. We really effed it up with that just to kind of create some more interesting values. Might be a little bit too intense for my taste. I might back that off a little bit. That's fine, I think. Double checking a few things here to make sure I'm in the right scale. There we go. Alright, that's fine. Let's blur everything. And then I'm just going to blur that slightly. I'm just going to back this off just a little bit. Okay, that smooths out some of those elements so that they're not as hard. And I'm going to up the quality of that blur somewhat. Let's take a look. It's very slight, but that's not much of an effect. Okay, let's create a normal map. Now, we should be using a DirectX normal. That's on by default. And I'm just going to pump up the intensity here. Okay, that's fine. This is the OpenGL one, and this is the DirectX. I'm going to leave the force alpha to 1. All that does is it kind of creates transparency. This is more pleasing. But remember, in DirectX, these bumps down are actually coming out at me. If you want to see it, what it looks like, this might actually help to look at it in OpenGL for a moment, but then always go back to DirectX. Let's go ahead and grab a curvature smooth. And we'll use a DirectX format because that's already formatted. Okay, so there's our initial math. This is our height map. So here is our height map. I'm going to go ahead and see. I want to go ahead and plug that in. Yeah, we'll do that. So our height map is right here. I'm going to unplug that. I'm going to plug in the base height here into here, which are our output nodes there. I'm going to right click the outputs in 3D view. Come on. Let's see if I can get something that looks decent. Default. Edit. Give me a moment to figure this out. It's kind of hard to see when we don't actually have a lot of information, and this doesn't have a color to it. Let's see. Plug in the normal map as well. I think that'll give me some better results. Yoink. There we go. Tessellation plus displacement. That's how you kind of get it to show up, but unfortunately, since we can't use displacement anymore, this is purely for visual purposes. Let's look at the lights here. Let's actually look at the environment. See here, that looks okay. I'm just kind of examining that to see if that's actually what I want. So I've actually already made a height map here, as you can see. It's pretty straightforward, nothing out of the ordinary. Alright guys, sorry about that cut. In the interest of time, I decided to spend a little bit more time kind of making this look decent. So, just double check this blend here. So what I've done is, after I got the height map put together, sorry about that guys, the video is being weird. So let's talk about what I did here. This took me a little bit longer than I wanted it to because I didn't really have a total plan in mind. So the last thing you guys saw was this. What I ended up making from this curvature smooth is I ended up making what's called a gradient map. And then I ended up breaking off some of those levels to create a diffuse map, or rather a base color, that I can use as a base color. I also extracted a normal map from the curvature smooth. But you know, I might change that a little bit. Double check. Well, I grabbed it from the normals here and then I pumped that up. I could add a little bit more power to make that look a little better. And then I did a bunch of coloring here. As you can see, I did a bunch for emissive masking. All I did was I grabbed a bunch of levels. I created some colors. I created a blend here. I created this particular color right here. So again, I'm not going to spend too much time covering this particular program. I just needed the outputs, and I ended up spending a lot more time than I would hope to kind of make this. I made a special mask down here to turn that into that and that into this so that I get a glowing color map just in case. So all I've done here with all of this particular work, and let me close this, is I've made a flat rock looking thing. That feels like that could use a little bit more blur. Let me go back. Sorry, I keep looking at this even after the fact where it's like I like it, but I don't love it per se. I don't know, which one do you guys like better? Slightly blurry, or you know what, I kind of like that. Let's do this. Kind of softens some of the effects a little bit more. Let me unplug the color. The emissive map looks pretty good. Let's unplug the emissive map. That looks a little better, so let's replug those back in. Okay. Let's take a look here. Sorry for the long cut. I basically cut out a bunch of unnecessary mumbling around, and I sat down, I had some lunch, and I couldn't think about what I wanted to do with this. So anyways, the whole purpose of this is to get our outputs here. All I've done, again, is created some gradients. I've blurred that a little bit. I created a color map here by mixing in some colors with some blurs and some gradients. A couple of blends to go from this to this to this. That looks even cooler. We've got some elements that I reused over here to create this, using that as a mask, and our final color, our emissive, which probably could be a little bit more powerful. Let me clear out that. I think that'll be fine. I can always power it up in Unreal. Okay. We've got an ambient occlusion. I might not use this. We've got a metallic map, which is 0. We've got a roughness, which is this. We've got a normal map, which probably needs a little boost. That's way too much. It gives me a little bit more overhead. That's pretty good. Alright. So all I've done here is kind of make this. And if you guys want, if people want me to go through this entire thing, I could probably do it faster during the office hour, but I don't think this is super important. Like I said, I'm just trying to generate a material that I can use to kind of showcase for the demo. So what this does is, what tools like Substance Designer do, is they allow you to generate procedural shapes to develop textures. This is a little well, this is not even just a little faster. This is a lot faster. This is about 40 minutes of overthinking this and then just kind of making a few things to make this work. So this is a lot faster than sculpting the details in ZBrush. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to output this. I'm going to save everything. I already saved this. And I'm going to export everything. So I'm just going to export my outputs. Let me find a folder for this. New folder. Okay. Select that folder. I'm going to export as True Vision Targa. I always export in Targa because Targa just gives me some better detail. Oh, not better detail, but Unreal seems to like them a lot more. Exported color space, sRGB, color map unlit. We'll do sRGB, base color sRGB, base color sRGB normal, roughness metallic, high ambient occlusion, raw, 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 raw. Export outputs. That should be done. We pause for a moment to go look for it. And there they are. Cool. Let's go ahead and close bridge. Back to perspective. Let's kick these materials off. Let's go ahead and import them. I would clean up that folder a little bit, new folder. Cool. Open this up. Did not mean to do that. I meant to do this. Shrink that. Let's grab all these textures. Double check, make sure that everything is set up according to 2048 by 2048. That's fine. Because you see that doesn't work, right? You guys see that doesn't work. Not in